Welcome to the annual Constitution Day event sponsored by the Department of Humanities within the College of Arts and Media here at Southeastern University. My name is Dr. Josh Britt, and I serve as Assistant Professor of History within the History program at Southeastern. And before I begin, we'd like to thank Dr. Rustin Lloyd, Chair of the Department of Humanities, and Dr. Craig Collins, Dean of the College of Arts and Media, for their guidance and support in planning this event. I'd also like to thank the community members who graciously accepted our invitation to participate in this important and timely discussion. Lakeland Mayor Bill Mutz, County Commissioner Martha Santiago, Associate Vice President of Community Relations, Sylvia Blackman Roberts, and our friend Ken Stevens, who's Professor of Human Services here at Southeastern University, is actually also the director or the coordinator for the program of Human Services here at Southeastern. The main topic of this Constitution Day Roundtable Forum is the First Amendment. Now, the Constitution Day is, as you guys may already know, is a day set aside by the US government to think about and discuss the US Constitution. So every year at Southeastern, we have a Constitution Day event, and because of the circumstances, we are going remote this year. And we want to talk about specifically the First Amendment of the Constitution, and we want to center on the First Amendment's emphasis on the right to free speech and the right for peaceful assembly. And we want to think about this within the context of our local within the city of Lakeland and our local context. Now, over the summer, we did experience protests in response to the death of George Floyd. And I'd like to start by asking Commissioner Santiago, can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a commissioner over the summer while these protests were taking place, as you are trying to protect people's First Amendment rights, but also maintain law and order during all of that?
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this forum. I think it's important. I think getting our perspective on what's going on is also extremely important. I do want you to know that what happened with George Floyd, please know that it was a horrendous incident, and in no way is it that I'm aware of by any commissioners or anybody that I've spoken to is it condoned or even applauded. It was horrible. But then, yes, you're right, it created some tension in our community. I think the tension, not only in our community, nationally, I think the tension has always been there, has just gotten worse as time has gone on and incidents have taken place. But we saw the demonstrations taking place in Lakeland. And then we saw how the demonstration agitated by a few people have gone into more of the rioting. My responsibility as a county commissioner is definitely the safety of people. I think that's the utmost importance. Assembling peacefully, protesting, that is our right. And I encourage that 100%. When it goes a different route and it affects the safety of our people, that concerns me. A couple of years ago, a survey was done in all of Polk County by our sheriff, and the #1 concern of the people in Polk County was safety. So that's our responsibility, and I wanted to make sure that our people were kept safe. Not only the people that were protesting, but people around in the surrounding areas. So, so that's what I was vigilant on, making sure that the people were safe as they exercise their right, their constitutional right.
Great, thank you. And Mayor Mutz, from the mayor's office, how did things look? And can you give us some sort of personal insight into how you approached that situation?
Certainly, I think there was a lot of tension building up to that. We have concerns by people that voices aren't being heard. And so when we hear that, then it becomes our responsibility to allow for a peaceful assembly, which was really done excellently by the leadership of Black Lives Matter. And, Jarvis Washington is actually a graduate of Southeastern University and is a very reasonable person and who I enjoy working with. So we joined that, my wife and my daughter and I had joined that protest and actually walked in that protest, and it was done as organized. And the unfortunate issue is that there are adjutants in groups like that that want to do something more. And so where I think our police did a great job of being off blocks from the protest, not being visible to become some kind of a precipitous force during or object during the protest. And that's wise. In other words, be as close as Commissioner Santiago has talked about to provide safety for people, but be distant enough not to be a reproach. And so we have social justice issues as a nation that we have not dealt with adequately over time. And the wonderful beauty of something as tragic as the events of the summer is that this opens up a fresh opportunity for us to move in and address those. And constitutionally, because of freedom of speech and the rights of individuals, it behooves us to make sure that those benefits are extended equally. And so when we go from where we're having a protest take place that is an assembly to draw attention, which it did appropriately, and I think we're hundreds of people that were communicating, a fervor can build. And an adjutants can take the fervor and turn them into non-protests, into riots, which is what we have seen continue so much in cities where there's an absence of police control. And safety happens in our nation with a defense department. Safety happens within our communities with police. There isn't a matter of that there isn't good and evil. There is good and evil. And so we have to prepare ourselves to be able to not defund police, but to properly utilize the police's wisdom and de-escalation as to be as drastic as necessary. And I think that's what we saw happen later in that event up at Memorial and Florida Avenue.
Dr. Britt, if I may add, in addition to the Lakeland peaceful demonstration, countywide, we had other places that had demonstration. And I must commend the people because I saw within the people that they wanted peaceful demonstration. They wanted to exercise their voice. And we saw through, Haines City, Lake Wales, Winter Haven, Lakeland, and other places, we saw people come together peacefully. And I think that message was really loud and clear. They want their voices heard. They're against what's going on, but at the same token, they know that peaceful demonstration is very important to make those changes. So I just wanted to say that, of course, we only focus on what happened in Lakeland, but we can't forget that other places in Polk County were exceptional when they demonstrated.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Mrs. Blackman Roberts and Dr. Stevens, can you guys, you guys have feet on the ground. I know you are very authoritative voices in our community. And Ms. Blackman Roberts, as the Vice President of Community Relations here at Southeastern, as Dr. Stevens in a pastoral role in our community, and with the Ledger articles that you've been writing, can you guys talk to maybe some changes that you've seen, or what kind of effect this new iteration of awareness and protesting that happened over the summer, what does that look like on the ground? What kind of effect is this having in our community?
In terms of from the communities, what I will tell you that I've seen and what I've experienced is the awareness coming to a level of understanding and greater than I've ever seen before. So very happy that people are willing to now have those conversations, to have that dialogue, to start talking about these things. And as the mayor and as well as Commissioner Santiago talked about, through the protests that we saw in the community, the message was loud and clear of what the intent of those protests were. And it was so comforting for me, and I'm sure for many of my friends and the small group that I talked to in my inner circle. All of us celebrated and was so proud to see us as a community come together, not just African Americans being out there, but when you see the mayors walking with you, when you see other individuals who have never done anything like this in their lives come out and say, we want to support what is going on. We want to change, and we want to be a part of that change. And that's the exciting part of it, because it is opening up a plethora of opportunities for us to become what I call greater. Ken hear me say this all the time. I just know that we can be greater. I know that we can be greater vessels. We can just be more intentional of what we do. So what I've seen in this very short period of time is a lot of the awareness bringing about a desire for change. But unfortunately, for many, the change won't come as fast as they want, because as I've said in the work that we're doing here at SEU, our work has to be intentional, but our work also has to be about long-term legacy work, and not just a reactionary to what is going on into the country, going on around the country. So that's kind of the what I've seen. That's kind of the conversations I've had. People continue to have these conversations. The conversations are still ongoing. Things are still unfolding. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we're just at the beginning of that work. And so my thing is, let's pace ourselves to get it to where we can move the needle to what becomes a more inclusive community, and not just inclusive in terms of us being felt like we're part of the community, but also in terms of access to jobs, resources, businesses, all of those things. And that's a lot of heavy work. So what I'm trying to do in my space is to help people pace ourselves so that we can get there, and so that we can become that, hope, maybe even a national model of how you get it right. And so I'm enjoying working with Dr. Stevens, who just brings so much additional experience. And let me just say, so when I preference this, I'm a little born and raised Mississippi girl who came from a civil rights activist mother. And so social justice has been a part of my life, my entire life. And as I tell people, it's in my DNA, and it's not something that just came about in a conversation for me today. It's been a lifelong journey. So Dr. Stevens.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm just going to piggyback on what Sylvia said. What I've seen, I sit on the Communities Relation Committee in Bartow, and I've been sitting on that committee. I was born and raised up here in Bartow, not implanted, been here all my life, went away for 20 years and I've come back. And what I've seen is what Sylvia's saying, awareness. I've seen a lot of awareness. I've seen the community willing to listen. In fact, government, when I talk about the government, the City Council of Bartow and the Mayor of Bartow wanting to, we actually sat down. We've had two open forums, and we've had forums on Zoom, and we're hosting another forum where the community is coming together, and we're bringing the police department, and we're bringing other community leaders, and just the fact that they're wanting to listen and help put together a strategy of how we move from point A to point B. I think we've come to a point in time where people are getting frustrated with just conversations. They want to see strategies and plans put in place, and that's what we're doing. I taught a class, I taught a class, Dr. Harris and I, on interracial communication. And I think people don't know what they don't know. And we have to be able to talk across, across the different cultures and understand each other's language that we are speaking. So I think that is the biggest that I've seen, is the willingness to listen, and the drive to put together strategies to move the needle. And that is key of what I've seen, not only in Bartow and Lakeland, but throughout the community, and even with law enforcement. You have them that are there willing to sit down and to hear and listen to to others, and look at it from the perspective out of the eyes of the people within the community.
So is there any advice any of you would like to give to our young people coming onto campus, maybe leaving home for the first time, in the midst of all that's going on, right? Rachel, tensions of the protests, some rioting, it's an election year, there's COVID. I mean, there's a lot going on, but what can we tell them about engaging with this tension in a productive way?
You have to create a safe place or a safe space for them to have that dialogue. Again, I'm going to go back to the interracial communication class that Dr. Harris and I taught. I don't know if you all know Dr. Richard Harris, but he was a ex-Grand Dragon of the KKK. And so you have him, and then you have myself teaching this class on interracial communication. And what we found was the first 2 weeks of the class, this is these 18 to 22-year-olds that we were teaching, the first couple of weeks of the class, the African-American students said not one word. They didn't engage. And Dr. Harris and I, as class ended about the third week, one of the white students came up to us, and she said, Dr. Stevens, her and another student, why aren't the African-American students or the Black students, why aren't they saying anything? And that right there helped to bring about more dialogue, because the next week of class starting, we engaged on why were they being silent and so on. People don't know what they don't know, but we become such a culture where if you say the wrong thing, you could be annihilated in the press. So they don't want to say anything. What we've talked about doing, and what that class did, was create this safe place or safe space where they can engage with students of color and someone's different than them, and then have that conversation. And if they say the wrong thing or misspeak in some way, they can be corrected until the point where they understand. Last point, I like to use Drew Brees in the statement. Drew Brees, playing with the Saints, he just I think a phenomenal quarterback, and what he's done for the community there in Louisiana. But when he was in the locker room with all of these African-American men, and when he made the statement that he made, he didn't realize how hard and how hurtful the statement he made affected them. And he had come back and he talked to them about it, because these are guys that he's been with for years, but he didn't understand their hurt in their position. And clearly there was a big disconnect, because he was active in the community, helping with social issues, helping financially, but he was not connected when it came to communication. So, but they bridged that, and now they're talking, and that's how we do that with these young people. We have to give them that space to be able to have that dialogue. Sylvia?
Yeah, and what I was going to say to that, Dr. Britt, as you know, we are working right now on diversity and inclusion here at SEU. And what I found from the students, of all students, is that we have got to build a level of cultural competency so that they feel okay to say what they know to say. And what the interesting part is that when you talk about those experiences of the segregation, that is my experience. That is my upbringing. So when I go in to talk to these students, and sometimes the classroom is all white students, and sometimes there's more diversity in the classroom. But when I'm talking to these students and I share with them that I came through segregation, that I had an upbringing in segregation, they then do start recognizing how close that is in terms of that. But what they also have started recognizing is the awareness of what they call inclusiveness, because they hung with their Black friends or they hung with a person of color. But what they started realizing was they did not involve those individuals as much in their inner circles. They weren't at their dining room table. When we start doing a little bit of that to give them a reference of what it means, now they're much more interested in the intentional aspect of how can we do better? How can we, and then we talk about the systemic racism that's in systems and processes, which they may elevate up to lead, and how that they can start being more aware of how those things may be excluding people, intentional or unintentional. If they look at their organizations here on campus and they realize that the same people are in the organization, why is that? Is it because is it in an intentional subgroup because they're all majoring in a certain major and they're coming together? Or is it something else that's keeping other people from joining into their group? So we've given them homework to go back and start looking at their own areas of influence, area of participation, so that they don't have to think about how to fix these bigger pictures that they may have a lot, be intimidated with right now. They're not as comfortable going out on the streets protesting or marching. I am making sure that they know that there's other ways that they can contribute in a significant way to help bring down some of those barriers, even if they don't want to go out. So it's been interesting dialogue. It's been interesting to get the emails to say, I'm going to start looking at my own circle here at SEU, how I participate, who I hang with. We've started having all of these conversations of how can we be more inclusive. So I think my advice to them is to start with their own circle and not try to navigate into an area they're unfamiliar with or may not be prepared to deal with if the situation could possibly get out of hand. So that's what I'm telling them right now. That's what's going on right now here at SEU. And I just know in a year from now, we're going to see greater. In another year from now, we're going to even see more. And as the years continue to go forward, we're going to be so inclusive into the fabric of who we are as SEU that these will be old conversations. So we're moving the needle, really slow, but we're moving the needle.
Dr. Britt, let me add to that if you don't mind. As you may know or may not know, my background is in education. I've been in K through graduate school, let's put it that way. So I've seen every single facet. And even though we see these students coming to college with the sense that they have not experienced either the civil rights movement or segregation or anything like that, they bring with them already experiences based on what they hear at the dining room table with the families and things like that. One of the things that I've noticed that we lack, and now even more so, because in order for this to get to the point where we move the needle a little bit faster, there is nothing in the high schools, middle schools, and even elementary schools where students can come together and have conversations and discussions or anything like that. In other words, if something happens that is hateful or racially inclined or anything like that, it's brushed under the rug and life goes on. So there is never a discussion. So what happens by the time they get into young adults, even though they've never experienced what other older adults have experienced, they still bring those behaviors or those beliefs or those thoughts of how we're supposed to get together. I am such a firm believer in communication, and I think of dialogue. I'm glad to hear that Bartow is doing more so. I think Polk Vision needs to, and I've already talked to the director there, we need to start county-wide. We need to start in different facets, in different areas, churches, schools, whatever, have those dialogues. So as the person, the individual ages, their behavior changes. You know, one of the things I thought about during this whole protest, I sat there and I thought and I said, and Sylvia, you said this, you know, it's an intentional change or is a reactionary change. And I questioned myself and I said, how many of these people are going to go back to their environment, work, church, community, whatever it is, and actually change? Or is it all a show? It has to be interchange. And I think that's what we need to focus. How do we do that interchange so that when a person goes back to work or back to the environment, wherever it is, they're not the same person anymore, and they won't treat people the way they treated them before. That's, to me, that's what you were talking about, that intentional change that we have to do. And it starts from little on up. We can't wait on the homes, because these kids come with so many things that we just need to focus and figure out how we can have these conversations, these discussions that do that intentional change.
So I want to maybe think a little bit about, you know, the way that the First Amendment is worded, right? The impact that it has, and really its versatility in our culture today. So the protests that occurred over the summer were protected under the First Amendment. However, others who might argue against the actions of protesters and so on also cite the First Amendment. We've seen the First Amendment cited by those who don't want to wear masks, right, for COVID. And so it's a versatile document. It's used in so many different ways. And of course, the whole purpose of having this forum today and even having Constitution Day is to make people aware of the U.S. Constitution and to be mindful of it. So Mayor Mutz, maybe you can weigh in on this. You know, how do we keep the language of the First Amendment, the Constitution in general, but the language of the First Amendment, the way that it's stated, the way that that it appears, how do we keep that alive in the discussion as we're looking at all of this that's unfolding right now in our society, in our culture?
The answer to the question is that we want it to be as broadly inclusive as possible without it taking away from someone else's rights in that inclusion. And so the document may have been more narrow by its creators in terms of what they were protecting, but the timelessness of it, or the effectiveness, not timelessness, the effectiveness of it is really that it does provide for that broadly. On a practical basis, I can tell you, when we've had 12 children, and being entrusted to raise them and then watch them go to college, there was one experience that was common for every one of them when they came home, the first time they came home from their freshman year, which was, holy cow, people's life experiences are so different from my own. And I think, what's the value of that? The value of that is that we raised our children to look for gaps. We raised our children to look at differences in playing fields. But until you drop in and experience it for yourself, we have internal prejudices that make us think our life's experience is the right experience, the right set of values, you know, the right way to look at those things. And so if we are going to do a good job of being broadly inclusive of people's rights to believe differently, and, you know, this takes it out of the context of a faith group that would think in a certain vein to a society that can endorse whatever its belief system is, to the extent it doesn't steal the rights from other people, then we are going to have to be people who ask good questions and who are good listeners. If we come to express our opinion, then we narrow our ability to do this well. When we listen for understanding, we go broad in terms of not compromising truth, because there is truth in the world. The sun comes up the same way every day. Photosynthesis works on trees every day. There are principles by design that are in place from some grand designer. You know, even if we want to zoom out and give everybody the opportunity to say, well, it's random. It's quite a random place to live in, but if that's where you want to park, then I want to understand, how can you consider it to be random? And what are some of the ways that enforce your randomness? Questions, smart questions, are how you learn to appreciate other people's perspectives. Our job is to recognize the gaps that create deficiencies in that process, and to be sensitive enough that when we're dishonoring others, limiting their ability to have shared privileges, how do we fix those things? And so that creates a greater sensitivity that takes me beyond my own life's experience and goes broader into understanding and appreciating the gaps of others. And those same connectedness that Vice President Roberts was just talking about with respect to opportunities that they can have in different arenas. How well are we really networking those? Sometimes just by an absence of intentionality, we fail. And other times because of prejudice, people fail, and design, people fail. Our job as people who care is to honor everyone. And so if we seek to honor everyone, we seek to maximize those rights, then we will come to the best kinds of conclusion that bring the best thriving health to a community.
I think that the first thing is their appreciation of the First Amendment, to know that to be challenged on policies, to be questioned on policies. I love that the mayor just said it about allowing the questions to be asked, and then the other aspect of that is listening to it. I think that if everyone could get to the point of having some appreciation for the First Amendment, just as we have appreciations for other amendments, and not taking the intent of those amendments and trying to craft them for a posturing position, but instead for the true integrity intent that these amendments were created for, I think that we would be better off, but that's easier said than done, because unfortunately, a lot of, Dr. Brett, you brought up about those that are speaking out against wearing a mask and seeing those of infringements on their inalienable rights that the Constitution gave us. And so those debate, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I don't claim to be. And I think that as lay people, when we're interpreting those, what we think it means, that maybe if we, through K through 12, and I don't know, Dr. Santiago, you can probably speak more to this in terms of what do that curriculum look like, so that we can start developing an understanding for our Constitution at earlier ages. And then as we go through and understand how our government work, what that means, and certainly the government respecting that the citizens have the right to publicly protest or to speak their piece, and they shouldn't be retaliated against for doing those things, as long as it's within the law and within the proper content of that law. So I just wanted to give kudos, Mayor, when you were speaking, and then as I was listening to Martha, I love to see the Constitution being lived. And so that's what I think that we really have to focus on, is how do we live that Constitution and the integrity of the Amendment 1.
I've come to the conclusion that if the First Amendment aligns with your beliefs, then it's right. If it doesn't align with your beliefs, then cut it out. There's no thing about amendments. And I say that is because I'm sure amendments also, I get flooded with emails on both sides, But, and the questions are good. I think that's one area where our students, our kids, even adults, we don't know what kind of questions we need to ask so that we could move forward with this. But one other thing that I thought about a lot is suspending judgment. We need to learn how to suspend a judgment especially when we deal with the First Amendment. We know that there's a lot of things in the First Amendment that the First Amendment protects that we don't agree with. We've seen it on TV. We've heard about it. We're not going to get into particulars, but you know what I'm talking about. But it protects them. And we, especially elected officials, have to respect that. And by respecting that and by suspending our judgment, I think we promote the First Amendment in what we do. It's not easy. It's not easy because, like I said, when you get a barrage of these emails exercising the First Amendment and trying to let you know where you stand. Plus, we have our own beliefs also that we have to deal with. So suspending judgment, I think, is really, really important for us to be able to even have our discussions, like Professor said.
I love that, suspending judgment. In 1983, I said, Kenneth Stevens, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I spent 20 years of my life, and my wife spent 11 years. We have 31 years of military service. And when I look at the First Amendment and I look at the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, and again, we won't get into the politics of it all. I'm often asked my feelings. It doesn't matter what I feel or my judgment. It is that I said I would defend the Constitution of the United States, and the Constitution says the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech. So I'm giving. I said I'll serve, and I did that. So I suspend my judgment, and however they decide to express those freedoms is totally protected under the Constitution. And I have to check my own feelings or my own judgment in that. The Bible says, "Judge not, lest you be judged." So, and I take that to, hey, this is what I spent 20 years of my life defending for them to be able to do it. However, if it's Muhammad Ali, or if it's the guys at the Olympics with the raised fist, either way, it is their freedom to do so. So that's where I take it when it comes to the Constitution and the freedom of speech. And you could best believe I've been asked some questions about this, especially the one freedom of speech that where do I stand and how do I stand? Well, I know where I stand, but I know what the Constitution says also.
I want to maybe touch on something that's, dealing with the First Amendment and looking at the actions of certain groups of people over the summer and even going on now. When we talk about riot, so there's protest, there's riot, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I think it's worth at least brushing shoulders with, since it does show up in the news and it is on the TV screens. Protest is a form of language, right? And even riot, even though it's illegal when it becomes violent and illegal acts are done, is still a form of speech, although it's illegal and not protected under the First Amendment, right? If you're burning buildings down or harming people, that's illegal. But to what extent do we need to examine the violent side of this to understand why people are resorting to violence?
Violence comes from the flesh. So if we left alone, I start to take away your rights with my anger. If you have been cut off in traffic, a time when you were in a hurry somewhere, and usher in that whole set of emotions that are on autopilot within us. And part of the problem is that when we are doing something that has a nobility to it in terms of a protest to raise an issue, our flesh can start to kick in. And that's why we must always have the balance of security and people that are in authority to keep people from taking away someone else's property right, the right to be safe, to assemble, anything that intrudes without protecting that First Amendment speech beyond once you start taking away my rights. That's the limits that we get to on the other side. It is the issue of good and evil that we live with in our society. We cannot escape it. We cannot assign appropriate intimacy and ask people to share their hearts. They have to want to move into those things. That's part of our flesh. We have to get over. We have to want to have those moments of communication. So what we must do is provide the right kinds of arenas in which to hold those assemblies in a productive way. So I don't think, and if we needed to do a Petri dish study, this one, then we go and watch what happened in Seattle and say, okay, so there it is. Let's see how well that works for them. It doesn't work for them. It is a matter of allowing lawless people who want to pursue exploiting the provisions of other people. Cuba was that, in the Castro regime. That's why we can go to Havana today and look at it frozen in time, 60 years of history later. Took investments of other people and exploited those investments without adding other contributions. So we have to keep this balance in place. It is not only a matter of my right to express, it is done within the context of truth. And so we cannot compromise what we know to be true. And particularly for Christians, we're going to watch those rights continue to want to be eroded. You can believe anything you want to believe, unless you believe this set of things, which is over here. And frankly, what would we expect a world to do if, in fact, the word of God is true? What would you expect a world to do but that doesn't want to advocate truth, take a shot at that set of beliefs narrowly to try and take the rights away from? So part of what has to be protected in the process of this is preserving everyone's rights to have faith and believe within the context of truth. And at that point in time, you cannot compromise.
I want to add to that. I appreciate what the mayor is saying, and I wish we had more of the of our leadership coming from a mayor's position and what he knows to be true and what works. I think as we explore about the rioting piece of it, I think that there's two pieces to that I've seen from what I would say going to the streets and also from my life experiences. I think that the first thing in terms of there are just some bad apples. They're just out there to take advantage of the situation and to become as more explosive as they can with things. And their intent has nothing to do with a voice or social justice or anything else. There's a whole nother agenda. I think that is a very, very small percentage. I think the other people who we saw rioting to the point of destructions, and I certainly do not agree with this and would not promote this or participate in it in any kind of way. But I think when the George Floyd situation happened and it was live on screen, it played over and over and over on every network, on the social media, on everywhere, it became that explosion of people who've been harboring anger and frustration and just sick and tired, as Fannie Lou Hamer say, of being sick and tired. And so with that, although it wasn't the right way to go about it, their frustration led to them the part that the mayor said, their flesh side of them, to say, what do I have to lose? I don't have nothing else to lose. So what? I burn down this building, or I devalue or I destruct somebody else's property. That's not even a concern in there at that moment. I think where the challenge became was we don't have a lot of Mayor Montz who gets this and say, how quickly can we start moving towards a solution? One of the things I say here at SEU, as we go out into the community and as I have a conversation, it's always starting with an open-ended statement of how can we be a solution to a problem? Well, I think the mayor has quickly recognized that frustration and anger and that lack of defeat has to be dealt with as much as that systemic part that caused people to get to that point. And so I think as you talked about, Dr. Britt, of exploring the rioting part of it, I think that the rioting part tells a story as well. It's something that must be factored in and given consideration as well of why that is happening, rather than saying we're just going to arrest them all, we're going to send out people to the police. I hate seeing our police put into those situations because that's, yes, law and order is what they do. And I have a police son, so I tell people all the time, we have made the ultimate sacrifice by him wanting to be a public servant and being out there. But at the same, and understanding that, I hate that that is some of the things that they have to deal with, these volatile situations that they're going into with riot gear and different things. And of course, that image that's projected out on the TV is not good for any of us. It's one of the worst images that you can do because it basically, the images pit them against us. And even even in times, and many times, where the police and the protesters came together, those were not good enough stories to headlight. So I think we do have to explore that part of the conversation, of the frustration, because those are the things that trickle. Usually we get more, and I'm sure the elected officials will tell you, they'll get more of those type of responses from the community about something they don't like than you get something with giving you the way to go, thank you so much piece. So I just want to say, I think that Riot and Peace do have a part in the conversation, and we as the leadership has to be the ones to help try to give voice to that and an understanding to that, because those people who are doing it, they have just reached the bottom, and they don't have another conversation. I think Dr. Stevens said they don't want any more conversations. They want action at that particular point. And so for those of us who can get into the room and sit at the table, I think we have a responsibility to bring in those voices of frustrations as well, and not just let someone lay it down as those disruptors that we need to go handle and push them to the side, because they're still part of our community and they're still part of who we are. And we can't be oneness if we're going to exclude some people. So that's what I wanted to just say to that anger part, because I just don't appreciate sometimes how I've been in rooms and people want to push it into just the bad part of it.
I don't condone rioting, but we do have to take and look at that and what are they. I always look at what's the voice behind it. What are they saying? I would tell you, as an African American male with 3 African American sons, and when George Floyd death occurred, I found myself at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, going out on my back porch, sitting down, I put my Facebook Live on, and I just appealed to America, and especially my white Christian brothers and sisters. And I said, help me understand because, you know, I'm a pastor, I'm a man, I'm a veteran, and I'm all these things, but I had so much anger in me because I couldn't understand, and I couldn't understand still how people can justify that which taken place. And when you've gone through that and you live the life in my shoes, and I just sat back, and I to the point I was in tears asking to help me understand how something like this can occur and still be seen as justifiable. Help me, America. Help me, my brothers and sisters. So I agree that that was me on my back porch. The generations now, the millennials and the Xers, they're going out and they're you know you know their voices are being heard through that hurt and anger, and unfortunately taking it out in the rioting. I want to, you know, when we look at Dr. King and we look at Malcolm X, we talk about civil disobedience, and we talk about when we look at you know the two philosophy between the two individuals. I kind of put that modern day 21st century. That's what we have. We have that population of the kings that are saying, you know, I'm going to march, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to use my right and my voice. But then you have this other population saying, we've been doing this for so long, and nobody's listening. One of my favorite movies is The Great Debaters, and I love what the young man said at the end of that movie. And he quoted St. Augustine when St. Augustine said, an unjust law is no law at all. But then he goes back and talks about, well, I have an obligation also, though, when the laws are you know, that unjust for me to speak out. And the young man said, you know, speak out through civil disobedience or through this other. He said, you better, when he said, you better pray I choose the latter, because so we get pushed. You can only push, and I said this in my video, you can only push people so far. Even me as a pastor, as a husband, you can only push me so far before all of those titles that I have, they leave, and then I have to do what I have to do as a man, and I would hope as a Christian man, but you can only be pushed so far to where you want to. You got to be heard, and if being heard, it means me going out and doing what it goes against all the moral and ethical and everything that I stand for. If that's the only voice that people are gonna hear, America's gonna hear, then I'm gonna get out and that's, like Sylvia said, we have to listen to that, because people are gonna be pressed down so much for so long before the pot explodes off the kettle.
That kettle is exactly what I was just thinking about when you were saying it. That's why we have to turn the heat down. We have to take the lid off. We have to talk about these things earlier, so we don't get to that kind of debate.
Yes.
We need to recognize the potential for, and if we're doing a good job of letting people have expression and hearing and understanding and responding, we'll respond differently. And so 100% with you. And add to that, we have a whole series of behavioral health issues in a society that has taken its norm off of God, and where we have relativism taking place too.
Yes, 100% agree, Mayor.
I hear what everybody's saying. And again, I talked about how horrific the George Floyd was. And I guess I'm coming from a commissioner where property rights, people being heard, all that is extremely important to me. But my mom taught me many years ago, she said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I think the protest is a voice that is being heard. Martin Luther King was just a perfect example of that. He did not want any violence. I think when we cross the bridge, for whatever reasons you've all expressed, I think the voice becomes a negative voice. And so I think it almost overshadows the voice that we're supposed to hear in the assembly of protesters. I can't condone, for whatever reasons, and I guess because I also come as a principal where I've had schools of 1,000 students, and I could not condone any type of violence. I could not, that just because somebody does something doesn't mean you're going to react like that. Again, it goes back to teaching, goes back to talking. And I say that to say this, yes, the rioting has happened and continues to happen. So this is a perfect time to talk about why those riots are taking place. What do they accomplish? What are they doing? Why do people want to be destructive? I mean, I understand the riot, the protest, but I don't understand the destructiveness of rioting. So this is a good time to talk about the why. What do they want to accomplish with this? Because I think it's more of a negative connotation than it is a positive one. So that's my take on that. I did it in 1.5 minutes, Dr. Britt.
Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. And I hear with this, we need to wrap this up. Maybe we can do it again sometime soon. Why have to wait till Constitution Day, right? Maybe we can do something else again in the meantime. And so I do want to give my sincere thanks to all of you for participating in this. And I look forward to doing it again. So with that, we will sign off. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Blessings. Blessings.
Thank you.